I don't have to tell you that life comes with seasons that we never asked for. Seasons of sickness, seasons of loss, seasons of financial pressure, seasons of exhaustion or disappointment and uncertainty. If I was to ask any of you here today, have you been through any of these seasons? Just raise your hand. If you've been through any of those seasons, most of us in here, and the others of you might have been asleep when I asked that question, but when I do ask questions, let me tell you, I do expect an answer. Okay, I do. Now, faith is not proven on some mountaintop, but it really is proven in the valleys. The phrase that runs through a thread, like a thread through Scripture is, even though I'm afraid, even though I don't understand, even though I can't see what God is doing, I will trust Him. And so over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be walking with David and Habakkuk and Paul. I gave Cruz Habakkuk because I just want to see how he does that. Habakkuk. That's one you don't hear a lot of. How many, you know what? You ought to name your next child Habakkuk. That would be good. 3 men who had every reason to quit, but they didn't. Now, they teach us that faith isn't the absence of fear, it's trust in God in the middle of fear. I read about a situation that happened in World War II where the London bombings were so constant that many families would live in the underground, in the subway tunnels at night. And one evening, after a heavy bombing, a father returned to his home and he found it completely destroyed. And he grabbed his son and he was running to the nearest shelter when some more bombs began to hit. And the father jumped into this deep crater caused by a previous bomb. And he reached up to his little boy and he yelled out to his son, "Jump, jump, jump." And the little boy was crying. He said, "Daddy, I can't see you." And the father replied, "I can see you. That's what matters. Just jump." And faith looks sort of like jumping when we can't see because we trust the one who does. And because all of us have been or are currently in or will soon be in a valley, we need to understand the power of faith when we go into it. None of us are exempt. Being a Christian doesn't remove the valleys. And a lot of people are like, well, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, bad things happen to everybody. That's what this life brings. But when we as Christians go through valleys, we should have confidence in God as we go through them. The Bible promises valleys, but it also promises God's presence in them. And so this series, we're going to hopefully be learning to say with David, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will not fear because God is with me. When darkness falls, fear speaks loudly. Isn't it crazy how when we're in a dark place, we hear every sound? How many of you grew up a little scared of the dark? I remember being in my bed, covered up to the eyeball, right? Where's the monster at? Well, when we can't see what God is doing, sometimes we feel abandoned. And we wonder, has God left me? When trouble comes, we assume that maybe God is fed up with us, or maybe God is busy with something else. Isn't this where our minds take us? Many times we go to the worst case scenario. But I want you to hear me, friends. The valley is lying to us. It is whispering, you're alone. God forgot about you. This is how it ends. And if we believe the valley's voice, we will give up in the dark. But Psalm 23:4 does not say, if I walk through the darkest valley. It says, even though I walk, even though it's dark, even though I'm afraid, even though I don't know the outcome, God is with me. And David teaches us that confidence is not found in the absence of danger, it is found in the presence of God. And so here's the big idea for today. Faith isn't the absence of the valley. Faith is the confidence in God in the valley. Faith is confidence in God while we're going through the valley. So let's talk about the first thought today. We will walk through dark valleys. The Bible promises these valleys, but it also promises, again, God's presence in them. And again, this series is about learning to say with David that we trust God. If we're going to hold on to faith in hard times, we first need to understand the valley. Darkness is not optional in life. It is inevitable. But notice he doesn't say he'll stay there. David doesn't say it. He says he'll walk through it. And that is so important. It's not going to be forever that you have to go through this trial. That's the difference faith makes. It gives us courage to move through what others get stuck in. And so let me read that first part again. Psalm 23:4. Even though I walk through the darkest valley. Now, David had walked through several valleys in his life. He walked through betrayal. You remember David's story. He came in and he was the harp player for King Saul because King Saul was tormented and hearing that music would help to soothe his spirit. But Saul became aware as David killed Goliath and became very popular. Saul became aware of his popularity, and Saul was jealous, and he tried to kill David. David never did anything against Saul. And I would say that is pretty much betrayal. There's also times when he could have had fear. I would say going out against a 9-foot giant who is scaring everybody would sort of make you tremble a little bit. He faced Goliath, but he faced Goliath with faith. How about broken relationships? David experienced that. You think of the relationship he had with his favorite son Absalom. Now this is part of the problem. David's blended family. He had all these children, but he had favorites, and that can be a problem sometimes. And Absalom did something pretty bad. He killed his brother because his brother had abused a sister, and so Absalom was taken up for her and killed his brother, and then they came at Absalom, and David had to exile Absalom from the kingdom. And when Absalom came back, he tried to take over the kingdom and rebelled against his father. Can you imagine your own child rebelling against you to the point where they want to destroy you? He experienced grief. And if any of you here have ever lost a child, you understand what that grief is. You think about people today, cancer patients call the treatment phase the valley. Many of you have been through that. Caregivers call burnout the valley. Parents of prodigal children call waiting the valley. How many of you have ever loved and lost a loved one? Raise your hand if you've ever lost a loved one. You know what it's like to walk through that kind of a valley. The ache, the emptiness, the questions. But here's the good news. You didn't walk through it alone. David reminds us that I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Again, it's not the absence of the pain or the evil, that gives us peace. It's the presence of the shepherd beside us. Now, how many of you or someone you know or love have had to fight through an addiction? Just raise your hand if you know somebody that's fought through an addiction. Maybe you've lost a job, or maybe you've had to face a financial fallout and the fear that comes with that. How are you going to provide for your family? Maybe you've walked through the valley of a broken relationship, a painful diagnosis, or a season where you felt forgotten. Have you had to struggle through some dysfunctional relationships that have caused you hurt and pain? David knew what all of that felt like. And yet in the middle of the valley, he could say, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Again, it's not the absence of the trouble that brings peace. It's the presence of the shepherd who never leaves our side. So stop being surprised when valleys come and start preparing your heart to trust God in them. Your valley doesn't prove God's absence. It proves your need for his presence. So don't confuse God's silence with God's abandonment. He is closer than you feel. If valleys are unavoidable, then we have to learn where to look in them, not at the danger, but at the shepherd, which brings us to our second thought today. God is with us in the valley. Again, it's not the absence of danger that David gave him peace. It's the presence of God. The valley may be dark, but he's not alone. How many of you ever remember growing up where it was, you're in darkness and your mom or dad had you by the hand and you felt safe with them? But if you were alone, it would have felt a lot different. When shadows grow long and fear whispers loud, the shepherd's nearness changes everything. Again, I will fear no evil. Why? Because you are with me. I want you to note the shift in the psalm. Earlier in the psalm, David said, God leads him. But in the valley, he says, you are with me. Now, I would say that pain can make God personal. When you're going through a lot of pain, whether it's emotional or physical or whatever, that pain can make your need for God very personal. Corrie ten Boom survived Ravensbrück concentration camp, and someone once asked her how she kept her faith. She said, there is no pit so deep that God is not deeper still. Isn't that true? The presence of God does not, again, remove the valley, but it removes the fear inside the valley. And friends, peace doesn't come from escaping trouble. It comes from God entering into it with us. So if you have God in whatever valley or whatever trial, whatever suffering, you have everything you need to walk through it. Now, some of you are walking witnesses of this truth. You have conquered cancer or heart disease or addiction and hardships. Now, I've asked that Paul Gibbs and Connie Taylor come to share some things with us this morning. So, Paul and Connie, if you can go ahead and make your way to us this morning. Most of you probably should know this, but Paul and Connie are brother and sister. Did anybody not know this? This is pretty evident. We're going to use these two mics for them. That way you don't have to pass it to. I know how hard it is to pass things to your brother or sister. Some of y'all have brothers and sisters.
I think it's the hair that
it's pretty hard. I want y'all to sit over here. Now we've known each other a very long time, and thank God that, and I knew your parents What wonderful people, you know. So today, I gave them some questions, and they're going to sort of share the answering of those questions. But the first question was, can you tell us a little bit about the valley that you have walked through and what was happening in your life at the time? So I think they've decided who's going to go and who's going to share.
There's been a lot of valleys that I've gone through, that we both have gone through. The one that I wanted to share about today was when we lost our mom. I had just graduated from college, and we grew up in a Christian home, but I really struggled in my teenage years, and it wasn't until mid-college that I really got focused on the Lord. And right after I graduated from college, I decided to go on a mission trip, and I went to Mexico for 2.5 months. My mom was always the one that really just pushed me spiritually and made sure I hung in there. I remember going through the really tough times, and she would always be like, "Did you go to church on Sunday? Did you?" And she would take me to the campus ministry. She's like, "You need to get involved with this." And God really used that. But I had just graduated from college. I had gone on a mission trip to Mexico for 2.5 months. I got back on a Monday, and then that Friday, our mom and dad were in a car accident, and we lost our mom in that. And it was just so traumatic. Our dad was also really hurt in that, and so he was in the hospital. And so we didn't know immediately what was happening with him. So it was just really hard, yeah.
So when you were going through that, what was going through you emotionally or spiritually as you were dealing? And I hope I didn't cut you off. If you have more to share,
you're doing it. I didn't think I could live without my mom. I'm gonna be honest. It was the hardest thing. It was the worst nightmare. I think spiritually, I remember sitting in the parking lot of the hospital and just praying. I would just pray. I was praying about the situation with mom. But I was also praying about Dad, and I would just hear in my head God saying, "I love you more than your mom could. I love you more." But at that point, it almost wasn't enough to hear that. I still wanted my mom to be here in the midst of that. I'll tell you more about that as we keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you want to share anything there? Or?
I think Connie's right. There's lots of valleys, and that is definitely a huge valley that I went through. I think when I was thinking about this morning, I really didn't want to come up here, to be honest with you. I didn't want to come and talk in front of you. But I remember last week in our parents' class that we had on Sunday night, and we shared that our testimony is powerful in our lives, in our families' lives, in the church's life. And I felt that the Spirit must have put that ahead of time to remind me to share things that are true, because you might be going through these things as well. And so that valley was huge. Another valley that's been real and fresh is Melanie going through cancer treatments. And for 25 years I had prepared myself to be someone who could help heal people of cancer, and then to see that someone so close to me that I love so much have to go through it just was eye-opening and just totally different than anything I'd experienced before. I've spent many a days talking with people on this is what your treatment will do, this is what our aim is, this is how we're going to go forward. I've even thought many a days from the patients that walked in the hospital, why would this not happen to me? But somehow this never crossed my mind that it might happen to somebody I love, and then it was just a shock. And so I know that there's many of you in here I've spoken with and had the same kind of thing, where all of a sudden one day you get news that you would never want to hear, whether it's your mom's been in an accident, your child is hurt, you have this diagnosis, or there's a big disease in your life. It's hard. It's just really hard.
Was there any time that you ever wondered where God was when you were going through the middle of this?
Well, I think I never really questioned where God was, but the biggest question I had was balancing God's power, what I knew God could do, with God's will, what I knew He was going to do, and that was the biggest struggle I have, and it's still something that I weigh today.
Yeah.
Knowing that I serve a God that can do anything, a God that makes the mountains, and a God that makes the valleys, and yet there is a valley in front of me, and knowing, is this God's will or is this God's will? And how do I pray? Do I pray with certainty that God, this desire that I have is what God's going to do, or do I pray with knowledge that God can do anything and I will follow Him through whatever He chooses?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Just knowing how to pray in that, and being able. It's hard to accept the reality, in the midst of these kind of things. It's hard. It's hard. But I felt God's presence through the whole thing. That it make it easy, but I did feel the presence of God. This is another valley, real quick. When we had our second child, Hudson, he was born. His intestines had ruptured in the womb, and he had to have surgery. And he was 2 days old, and just in the NICU for a long time. And he was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. He is doing great today, and if you see him, you would never know. Yeah. But in the midst of that, I remember feeling like the parents in the scriptures that you read, and they see Jesus and they fall on their feet in front of him and just like, come heal my child. I remember feeling that desperation, in the midst of prayer, and just knowing that he had the power. One time in the midst of praying for Hudson, I remember, I don't know how you feel about, I think when Tim was saying, your pain makes God really personal, and it makes it really personal to you. It is. And I remember praying and just really feeling in my head, God's saying, I can heal him physically, but if he never knows me spiritually, that's way worse. Mm. And so then I started praying for his, that Hudson would always follow Jesus and love Jesus. That's, was something. Pray that for both of my children. Yes.
Yeah. So you just mentioned, a prayer. Was there any moment, or like you say, prayer or verse or someone that came and spoke to you that really helped to remind you that you weren't alone?
Well, I think this has always stuck with me. When Mom died, members of this church just did so many things for us. I mean, she had died. My dad was in the hospital, so we had to plan a funeral while you're hoping your dad makes it through intensive care. It was kind of a tough situation. And we had family from another state, and people let them stay at their homes. I'll never forget that. It means so much. People provided meals. They took care of our family. It'll always be there. And people came and just sat in the waiting room and didn't say a word, but just sat every day. And I just knew that they loved us, that you loved us, because you were just there. And with what Melanie's went through, I mean, you've brought meals, you've sent cards, you've asked, you've sent texts. You are the hands and feet of Jesus. And I felt God through you. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it.
I feel the same way. There's people that I look at, and I see some of you right now that he's talking about that loved us and helped us through that. It was hard. It was really hard. I was really young. We were really young. There's lots of verses that stick out to me that basically the character of who God is. Verses like that stuck out to me. I remember it was about 3 years after I'd lost Mom. We had lost Mom, and I'd done different mission work and things after losing her, and no matter where I went, she still wasn't there. It was traumatizing. But coming back, I was helping out with CCF. I wasn't full time with them yet, and I remember in the midst of we were at a retreat, and it was really loud in there, and lots of students and lots of people going through different things. And there was one specific girl that I had been meeting with that was really going through a hard time. And I remember just really feeling in my head and just hearing again, like God saying, I didn't just love you more than your mom. I loved you through her. And I need you to love people for me like that. And I was like, he's like, can you? I was like, I can do that, you know. And so, and when I had children, I feel that same love, like God's love, just loving it. And I think he's just been so consistent in my life and just consistent in loving me and just studying more of the character of God. I've just seen that compassion and the love that he has for us. It is so much greater than anything we can comprehend, you know.
Yeah.
The book of James, there's a lot of verses that stuck out to me. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds. And I'm like, wow, that's a hard verse. It's so hard. And then that your faith can mature and be complete. And then in James, in the 5th chapter, it talks about if you need prayer, ask the elders to come and anoint and pray for you. And this is something I've lived by, and we've done that, and we've asked for your prayer. We've asked for the elders' prayer. We've asked for anointing, just following what we see the Scripture says. And I feel that step was the right step for me to make it through. I felt like that was obedience to God and being in line with what he wanted.
Yeah. What would you say God taught you through all of this?
Well, I think God, I said it earlier, but the God who made the mountains helps us through the valleys. You know, I think that's something that I was taught really well, and also that we can be the light to others as they go through that valley. And we never need to forget the impact that a smile or a text or a word or a kindness can do to somebody else.
Yeah.
And just really, I think that the situation really woke me up even more spiritually, and that nothing is more important than our faith in Christ and people and sharing that with others, like what Paul's talking about. And I think it really compelled me to just love people more on a deeper level, and just the need that we have for each other. There's so much I learned. I mean, we could probably talk for an hour on the things we
I
learned.
do think that I felt closer to God in the valleys than I do any other time in my life. He's there, but somehow I'm more attuned to him. Maybe I'm the problem, but there is no doubt that I've been closer to God when things are bad or tough.
What would you say to anybody here today that might be going through some kind of valley?
You can't do it alone. You surely can't do it without God. You know, you need to reach out to him. You need to be willing to say, I can't do it. Just in this example, you know, I've made chemotherapy for years and I can't do it. And sitting around waiting, I think Tim mentioned earlier, there's different groups of people that might say, this is the valley. Well, waiting is a valley. That's hard because our mind goes all over. Sometimes it goes to the worst scenarios and just stays there. And you just stay in that spot.
And that God is really so personal with us. He loves us so dearly, and seeking him. And like Paul's saying, like we do need each other. We need, you know, I work in ministry, and so I feel like all the time I have to have it together. So when we were going through the situation with Hudson, I felt like I didn't know how to ask for help, you know. And I finally just came up here in front, and I was like, I don't have it together. I need help. I need people to love me. Because so many times we want to do it on our own. And we need each other. We need each other. Let people love you. That's why we're here in the church. And I want to love you. You know, I love to love people. But we need each other, and that God is close. He's not far from any of us.
Yes. Thank you guys for sharing today. Can y'all give them a hand? Just put those back in there. Thank you, brother. Love you, man. You know, it makes a difference to hear other people's experiences And since God is with us, we're not just surviving the valley, but we are being guided through it. And I think that their faith is greater because of that. Now, the third point and final point is that God will lead you through the valley. Jesus is our shepherd. He doesn't just walk beside us, He leads us forward. His presence gives us comfort, and His guidance gives us direction. And that's why David could say with confidence, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Now, the rod would be used for defense and the staff for direction. So God is not only present, He is active. He is fighting for you. He is guiding your steps. He is protecting your soul. And people who look back on seasons of sickness or addiction or recovery or loss or depression say, "I didn't know it then, but God was guiding me through every step." And sometimes it's only after we've walked through the valley that we can sort of look back and see how faithfully God was to us. I want you to hear from someone today who's lived that truth out. And I've invited Matthew and Christy Pinnell to come and share. So Matthew and Christy, wherever you are, if you don't mind coming up. They're going to be sharing with us about how God has led them and walked with them through some difficult times. Thank you, Matthew and Christy, for coming. Give them a hand. Give them a hand. Let's grab one of those mics there. All right. I think y'all have decided which one is going to go first and sort of like that. So the first question is this: would you start by telling us about a season that you have been through in life that felt sort of like a dark valley?
Okay. So I tell this story a lot. This is my testimony so many times when I'm at work at the hospital and everything. But I had to figure out how to condense it down. I was told that I cannot sit up here all day and talk. So as me and Matthew were going over some of this stuff, I was like, "You don't understand. Like, I got to write this down. I got to, like, put this together. Like, he can just reel things off." I'm like, no. My mind doesn't work like that. We will be here all day, like, and I'm like, we can't do that. So anyway, so I have my note cards. I'm old school. And I'm going to try to stick to them a little bit so I don't get off track. But so a lot of y'all know, but I was pregnant with quadruplets. This was a scary season of life. This is not something that we thought would happen. We were, in fear and just not sure of what that would look like. We're going to kind of jump to 22 weeks. I got put on a strict bed rest. I don't like to be still, so this was, number one, a challenge. But anyway, there was a lot of ups and downs in our pregnancy. Lots of scariness, fear, and got put on bed rest. Then at 26 weeks, we went into the hospital, and there was a lot going on. They weren't sure if the babies were going to make it, any of them. And we had a lot of people surrounding us in prayer. And we made it through that season, and we got to 29 weeks. At 29 weeks, we went to the appointment. Every day we were going weekly for weekly appointments to the high-risk clinic. We went and we had the ultrasound, and I'm going to try to hold it together. So we had the ultrasound, and they were doing all their measurements and everything, and they told us that our girl Taylor didn't make it, that she had passed probably hours before we got to that appointment. And then Noah wasn't getting oxygen to his brain. So there was just a rush of, all the emotions. And so from that point, he was like, we need to get you to the hospital if you want to save Noah. This means we're going to have to induce early. We don't know what will happen with the other ones. And so they rushed us from that point because, of course, we were like, yes, please, we need to go in immediately. Rushed us to the hospital. At that point, there was chaos. I don't even know what I was doing. Like, they were like, do this, that, and the other. There was 1,000 people in the room. Lots of emotions and, just fear and anxiety and not knowing what that would look like.
She did extremely well, didn't she? Because, I mean, you did good, girl. You did good. Now, look, in that season, was there ever a time when you sort of wondered or felt that maybe God was absent or distant or silent? And what questions maybe were you wrestling with at that time?
Yeah, so yeah, that was definitely a roller coaster to say the least during that time. Definitely resonate with what you were talking about, where there are often times where God does seem, from our perspective, silent. And for me, I'm dealing with all this grief from Taylor dying, and it just brings up all these floods of emotion from my past, because it was just a couple of years prior to that my dad had died. And so that grief with Taylor passing away really connected to that moment. And more than anything, there was a sense of bitterness, but I wouldn't say it was necessarily a bitterness that was directed towards God. For me, it was more of a bitterness of just how harsh life can seem sometimes, and just like this reality we were now living in. Because for me, just like I know many of you in here probably do this, like we think about and we run these movies through our minds of how we think our life is going to be. And I thought about when me and Christy got married, how it was going to be so cool to see my future kids playing with my dad and mom, and then my dad died, and you realize that movie you were playing in your mind wasn't real. And you would think something like that, going through the loss of my dad, would prepare me for the loss of Taylor. But let me just tell you, it doesn't matter if you lose one loved one, it will never prepare you for the next one, because the situation with my dad was definitely not like this one. And the main thing really wrestling with was just how was I going to continue to trust in God when everything in our lives just considered broken at the moment. And I knew it was a moment that I couldn't fix. And I have a very analytical brain, so I like to fix things. And just knowing in that moment that I couldn't fix what was going on in our life at that time.
And was there a time, or as you look back on it, how do you actually see that God was sort of guiding you through all of this?
So looking back, I can see how God surrounded us with people, people that loved us, poured out their love, showed so much kindness. Just like Paul said, they were the hands and feet of Jesus. And even in the moments that we couldn't see God clearly at the time, you can look back and just see God all over it.
Yeah. So were there moments or people that God used to sort of come into your life and minister to you and help you walk through it?
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, something you said earlier really resonated with me, because it was very similar to what we were going through. Taylor had just died, but we also have 3 other boys who are on life support fighting for their lives, and we don't know if they're going to make it. They're going to make it either. So I wanted to mention specifically these 2 people, Jeremy and Lindsay Jones, who used to be members of this church. Jeremy and Lindsay are actually the reason me and Christy ever even came to this church. So if y'all are happy about that, if y'all ever see Jeremy and Lindsay, y'all can thank them. If you're not, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But man, for them, like wrestling with, we're trying to figure out, how do you properly grieve the loss of your daughter and still trying to have the energy to fight for your son, to, like I said, you don't know if they're going to make it. And man, Jeremy and Lindsay really came along, because they could empathize, because it wasn't shortly before that they had lost their son Aiden. And they came to us and sat down with us. They were able to empathize and understand our situation. But more than anything, they came to us and were like, look, we've had this fund set aside in Aiden's memory that we wanted to bless y'all with this money and give your daughter. So
they wanted to be able to have give us the opportunity to have a place where we could have her buried, and to, you know, and so we did a small burial. Tim came and did that with us, and that was just a blessing for us because, you know, it's a lot to process at the time. And I'll quickly share, you know, a really hard moment for me during that time was, you know, we don't know how to process anything at this time. Like he said, like, we didn't know at that point if Noah was going to be able to walk. Like, there was a lot of questions, and along with the other two that were, you know, fighting for their lives as well. The NICU is a scary place. There's a lot of ups and downs. So for them to come alongside, and then there was a lady at the hospital that came, and she was like, "Would you like to, you know, have this experience to hold her?" And that was a very, very difficult time for me because I was like, "No, like that's really strange." Like, but I was so thankful for her being the blessing and the people that are there that provide the memories there for you to be able to look back on, and for, you know, Jeremy and Lindsay to have that already set up. That's not something we would have thought about at the time because we couldn't process anything, you know. During those seasons you can't really think, like, you just can't think clearly. So, you know, their blessing was significant.
So how would you say God sort of changed you, or maybe how did this change the way you trust God from that point on?
So, sorry, I'm going to go back to your other question real quick.
Oh, okay.
Because I was going to chime in something after he finished. And there's so many people that we could thank. And like, I could be up here all day, just like they said. But significantly, I just wanted to, you know, quickly mention, we were just so grateful for the love poured out from this church, from family, friends, work. I mean, it just, blessings came from people that we didn't even know. I mean, I had people messaging me that were like, "We're praying for you," and it just meant so much. But one of the things that was significant for us was those meals, and you know, the visits and the calls and the texts. But the meals, like, when we were there night after night at the NICU, and, you know, before and after, and it was just such a blessing. We had so many of y'all come and sit with us, and it was just really, really grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll pick up there too. And Christy wanted to also, you know, kind of emphasize for her, as part of her testimony, it was her seeing you guys come and bring the meals and being the hands and feet of Jesus. That is the reason that she's so passionate today about our meal trains that we set up for the church and stuff like that, because there's just, you know, I think you said it earlier, as you were talking about communion, it was resonating in my head about there's something really special about a meal, and like how important meals are in the Bible. You know, I think about Jesus as he's walking on the road to Emmaus with the disciples, and they have no clue who he is until he sits down and he breaks bread and he shares a meal with them. Like, and it's like their eyes are open, and now they can see Jesus. So just know there's something super powerful about when you partner with this program and share a meal with people. Like, even if you get the chance to just sit there with them and talk to them for a second when you go have that meal with them, man, it's a very, very powerful thing.
Yes, yes.
And then I'll finish with Tim's last question. You know, I trust God today because I've seen his work in my life, and I know so many people can say the same. You know, he provides time after time after time, and we can just see those miracles provided. I don't know how people can say they don't know who God is, because he just provides. He's a constant. And so I just tell you to keep trusting in him and remain faithful, and he will see you through those valleys.
And I just want to hop on real quick on that one. You know, I can see the change in Christy's life, because once again, I am a super analytical person. Something happens, I'm looking of how can we fix it? How can we, you know, how can we put Humpty Dumpty back together again? So any of y'all in here who think like that, y'all can resonate. But Christy, though, through all this, has really, like, when things happen now, she's like a basketball coach, like rallying our whole family in the den together to circle around in prayer as soon as something happens, before we even start doing anything else. So just for her, it's been a huge testimony of just showing that everything we do should start with prayer, and then we'll figure everything else out. So, and then just to kind of wrap up, like you said, you want to go ahead?
No, just what would you say to people here who might be going through times of struggle?
Yeah. So once again, you said it earlier about the perceived silence, and that's exactly what it is. Like, it's only God's silence from our perspective. And I know you mentioned it already in the sermon, like, God doesn't abandon us. I think of the song Waymaker, and in that song it talks about even when we can't feel it, he's moving. Like, even when we can't see those things, God is working behind the scenes in those areas of our lives. And also remember, like, be those hands and feet of Jesus. God didn't just bring us through these things in our lives for us to just sit back and not be able to be there for other people who are going through these same valleys. I think often about how there are these mountaintop moments in the Bible, right? But the thing is, I think of Moses, right, meeting God on the mountain at Mount Sinai. But he wasn't meeting God on the mountain to stay on the mountain. He was meeting God on the mountain to bring God down into those valleys. And that is our job as Christians. And I'll also say too, for me it's been very helpful. Don't think that when you're moved to emotions over the loss of a loved one, that's somehow showing weakness, right, or something like that. I would much rather have those moments that I had with my dad, that we had with the pregnancy of Taylor and being able to hold her after and have her funeral. I'd rather be able to look back on those things and have them than to have never had the possibility to have them. So when you think back, just look for those silver lining moments after you're going through that grief, And like I said, if you're people like us who have been through that, like, don't be afraid to walk with other people in their grief, because that's what we were made for. Like, God created us to be communal people. When we're alone, when we're isolated, that's what the enemy wants for us. But when we're together as a community, we're strengthened, and it's our job to help build up and strengthen each other through those times.
Yes. Well, I want to thank both of you for coming and sharing today. Would y'all give them a hand for coming and sharing? Thank you, brother. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Their journey reminds us that valleys don't last forever. They have a great family. They got 3 great teenage boys that are loved. But God's presence is with us forever. No matter what our loss is, God's presence is there. Even when we can't trace his hand, we can trust his heart. And that's exactly what David meant when he said, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So you may not see the path, but God sees the destination. You need to trust his leading. Don't run away from the valley. Walk through it with the shepherd. God will not waste your valley. He will use it to strengthen your faith. So friend, you have a good shepherd. You are not alone. Your valley is not your home. It's just a place that you're passing through. And even though it's dark, I will trust him. And I hope you say that too. So there's 2 questions I want to leave with you today. What valleys are you walking through right now? And who are you trusting to guide you through it? Now, if you're walking in a valley today and you need prayer, I'm going to invite you to come as our praise team is leading us in our final song. I think in your bulletin, in the outline at the end, it has a place where you can declare, Lord, I trust you even though. And it says this, even though I am dealing with blank, I will trust you. Why don't you write whatever it is you're dealing with and lay it at the altar of the cross. And as they're singing again, I invite you to come up. I'm going to ask Matthew and Christy, would you mind coming back up? Paul and Connie, would you mind standing up? And if you need to pray with somebody, if you just need to come and kneel or pray where you're at, whatever it is you feel God leading you to do, we invite you to come. Let's be standing. Let's be singing.